I never thought this would happen, not to me, not to us. It feels like it was just yesterday when she was calling me Mom, her voice full of trust and love. But now, that simple word has become too much to bear. My daughter, the little girl I raised with so much care, has refused to call me Mom anymore. She barely acknowledges me when I speak. It's like a wall has gone up between us, and I don't know how to break it down. At first, I told myself it was just a facey teenage rebellion, maybe. Kids go through things, right? But days turned into weeks, and nothing changed. It wasn't just the name she stopped using, it was everything. Her laughter that used to fill our home now felt like a distant memory, replaced by silence. When she looked at me, I didn't see the little girl who used to run to me with open arms. Instead, it felt like I was a stranger in my own house. I tried to talk to her, of course. I tried to understand what had happened. Was it something I did? Something I missed? Was she mad at me for something I couldn't see? But every time I reached out, she pulled away even further. The conversations that once came so easily now felt forced and awkward, like we were speaking different languages. I began to wonder, what did I do wrong? Was I not enough? And yet, every time I tried to get close, it seemed like she pushed me further away. I found myself standing at the edge of her world, watching from the outside, feeling helpless and confused. The silence between us grew louder with each passing day. But then, something happened. Something that changed everything. The days turned into weeks, and I found myself grappling with something I never thought I'd have to face. The realization that my daughter, the one I had given so much of myself to, no longer wanted me in her life the way she once did. Every attempt I made to understand her just pushed her further away. I tried talking, tried explaining how much I loved her, but each word seemed to fall on deaf ears. She would nod quietly, her eyes distant, as if my words were nothing more than a blur. I could feel the gap widening between us, a chasm that felt impossible to bridge. It wasn't just the coldness, though. It was the anger I saw in her eyes whenever I tried to reach out. It was like I had done something unforgivable, though I had no idea what it was. Her silence screamed louder than any words could. I began to wonder if she even remembered the love we once shared. The way she used to curl up beside me for comfort, the late-night talks we had about everything and nothing. All of that seemed like it belonged to someone else's life, not mine. And the hardest part? She wouldn't even call me Mom anymore. It was like a simple word had become a symbol of everything that had gone wrong between us. I tried to tell myself that it wasn't my fault, that this was just her trying to find herself, that I couldn't control everything, but deep down, a voice kept whispering to me that I was failing as a mother. If I had been doing things right, she wouldn't be slipping away from me. I began to question everything. Was it the way I raised her? Did I push her too hard, or not enough? Was it something I said? Something I didn't say? Then, one evening, everything seemed to come to a head. I was sitting at the kitchen table, half-heartedly scrolling through my phone, when I heard her voice, soft but sharp. "I don't need you to fix everything," she said, her back turned to me, her face hard and set in a way I didn't recognize. The words hit me harder than I expected. I could feel the sting of them in my chest, like a punch that came out of nowhere. "I'm not trying to fix everything," I replied, my voice trembling with a mix of hurt and confusion. "I just want to be here for you. I always have." But she didn't turn around. She just walked away, leaving me alone with my own pain and the questions that I couldn't answer. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was breaking inside of me. Each day felt like I was losing a little bit more of her, a little bit more of the person I thought I knew. I watched her go through the motions, school, friends, life, while I stayed on the sidelines, unable to reach her. The girl I once knew so well seemed to be slipping away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I spent nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when I had lost her. Was it the little things I didn't notice, the moments I took for granted? Or was it something bigger, something that I just couldn't see? But one night, everything changed. It was late, and I had just finished cleaning up the kitchen, when I heard the front door open. The house was quiet, save for the distant sound of footsteps, a noise that carried an urgency I didn't recognize. I stood there for a moment, frozen, waiting. And then, she appeared in the doorway, her eyes red, her face pale, and tears streaking down her cheek. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, shaking slightly. My heart dropped, and every instinct in me screamed to reach out, to comfort her, to make everything better. But as I stepped forward, she took a step back. I don't know what to do, Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And for the first time in weeks, she looked at Minot with anger, not with detachment, but with vulnerability. The kind of vulnerability only a daughter should show to her mother. But even then, I hesitated. In that moment, everything inside of me wanted to pull her close, to say the words I had been holding back for so long. I wanted to tell her that I was here, that I loved her no matter what. I wanted to erase the distance between us, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there in silence, watching her, letting the tension fill the room. My heart broke at the sight of her, but I stayed silent. I let her speak if she needed to, let her come to me when she was ready. Her words hung in the air, heavy with pain, and for the first time, I realized something I hadn't fully accepted before. Maybe she didn't need me to fix things. Maybe she just needed space. Maybe my silence wasn't a rejection, it was the only thing I could give her that would allow her to find her own way. She wiped her eyes and gave me a faint, hesitant smile. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I'm scared, Mom. I don't know how to feel anymore. And as I watched her, I realized that no matter how badly I wanted to fix everything, I couldn't. Not now, not yet. I know, sweetheart, I said quietly. But I didn't press her. I didn't say anything more. I just let her be. The silence between us wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. In that moment, I realized something. I was no longer the one in control of this situation. I couldn't fix everything, and maybe it was time to let her find her own answers, even if that meant staying silent. The silence between us stretched for what felt like forever. I saw her every day, but it was as if she wasn't really there. She would barely speak to me, and when she did, it was always short. The tension in our home was palpable. We were two people living under the same roof, but emotionally, we might as well have been miles apart. But then, something unexpected happened. I began to notice little change, destiny, almost imperceptible shifts in her behavior. She started to leave notes for me, little things that seemed insignificant but meant the world. I'm sorry, Mom, written on a scrap of paper and left on the kitchen counter. Thanks for dinner, scribbled hastily on a napkin, placed beside the. At first, I couldn't quite make sense of them. They weren't grand gestures, just small moments that spoke louder than any words she could say. She was reaching out, in her own way, and I realized that I wasn't the only one struggling with the distance between us. She was trying to. It was still hard though. Every time I saw her, I wanted to ask her what was going on, wanted to fix everything with a simple conversation. But I held back. I stayed quiet, waiting for her to be ready to talk, to open up. It was painful to keep my distance, especially when she seemed so fragile. But the truth was, I couldn't keep trying to fix things. I couldn't force her to let me in. One evening, after weeks of this silent tug-of-war, she came into the living room, her face tense, but her eyes searching. For a moment, she hesitated, standing in the doorway like she wasn't sure whether to speak or retreat back into the silence. And then, with a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I'm scared, Mom. I don't know how to fix this." I felt a sharp pang in my chest, but I didn't rush to fill the space with words. I just nodded, letting her know I was listening. I feel like I've messed everything up, like I'm never going to get things back to how they were, she continued, the vulnerability in her voice cutting through. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I can. I watched her closely, the weight of her words sinking in. There it was, the reason for all the distance. She wasn't rejecting me. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was lost, and she didn't know how to find her way back. I wanted to say something. I wanted to hold her, tell her everything would be okay. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed silent. "I'm right here, sweetheart," I finally said softly, my voice calm but firm. "When you're ready to talk, I'll be here." But I didn't. Instead, I stayed silent. "I'm right here, sweetheart," I finally said softly, my voice calm but firm. "When you're ready to talk, I'll be here." Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in a long while, she seemed to crumble. Slowly, she stepped forward and sat beside me. I didn't rush to comfort. I didn't need to say anything more. I just let her lean against me, letting her feel my presence without needing to say a word. It was in that silence, or shared silence, that I realized something I hadn't understood before. Sometimes, love doesn't mean filling the silence with words. Sometimes, it's about being there, quietly, waiting for the other person to be ready. I didn't need to fix. I needed to trust her, to trust that she would find her way back to me when she was ready. And so, I sat with her in the quiet, knowing that our journey wasn't over. The silence wasn't a sign of failure, it was a step towards healing, a space where both of us could figure things out in our own time. The weeks that followed were a delicate balance between the quiet moments, the uncertainty, and the fragile hope that, one day, we would find our way back to each other. But something shifted in me during that time. I started to realize that I didn't need to have all the answers. I didn't need to control the situation or rush the healing. What I needed to do was trust that she would figure it out when the time was right. I spent time focusing on myself, taking small steps to find my own peace, separate from the whirlwind of emotions surrounding my relationship with. I began doing things I hadn't done in years, things that had been buried beneath the weight of parenting. I started reading again, taking walks, and giving myself the space to. I wasn't abandoning her. I was learning to find balance in my own life, knowing that I had to be whole for her to see that it was possible for her to. There were still moments when the silence would feel unbearable. The times when I would see her sitting alone in her room, her face distant, and I would long to reach out, to break through the wall she had built. I wanted to be the one to comfort her, to make everything okay, but I didn't. I held back. One afternoon, I came home after running errands, and I found her sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and swollen. She had clearly been crying, and the sight of it made my heart ache. But this time, I didn't rush over to her. I didn't ask what was wrong or offer 1,000 solutions. Instead, I sat across from her, silently. Wait. She looked at me, then quickly looked away, but there was something in her eyes that made me think she was on the verge of saying something. I waited, giving her the space to speak when she was ready. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she said, "I don't know what to do anymore, Mom. I feel like I'm not good enough, like I'm failing at everything." I could feel the weight of her words, the pain in her voice, but I didn't say anything. I didn't offer advice or try to fix things. I just let her talk. I'm so scared that I've ruined everything, that I've messed everything up, and I don't know how to fix it. And in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't asking me to fix it. She wasn't looking for me to solve her problem. She was looking for validation, for the assurance that it was okay to not have everything figured out, that it was okay to be lost sometime. I finally spoke, my voice soft but steady. "You don't have to have it all figured out. It's okay to not have all the answers right." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time, she didn't pull away. She let me sit there, next to her, without the need for more words. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was just peace. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same page. She didn't need me to fix things. She didn't need me to have all the answers. What she needed was for me to just be there, to let her find her way, while showing her that I believed in her, no matter what. And that, in itself, was enough. It wasn't an immediate fix, and it wasn't easy. The truth was, the silence didn't suddenly disappear, and neither did the pain. But something was different. We were beginning to understand each other, piece by piece, in our own time and in our own way. There were still quiet moments, still times when I wanted to speak, to fill the silence with my words. But I realized that sometimes, it was the quiet that spoke louder than anything I could say. One evening, as we were sitting in the living room, something shifted. We were watching a movie, nothing special, just a random film we both liked. It wasn't the kind of moment where either of us was expecting to say anything important. But as the credits rolled, she looked at me, her face a mix of hesitation and longing, and for the first time in what felt like ages she spoke. "I miss us, Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me in ways I didn't expect, as though they had been hanging in the air for so long, just waiting to be spoken. I didn't jump to fill the silence with words of reassurance. I didn't rush to apologize or tell her everything would be okay. Instead, I let the moment hang there, as heavy as it was. "I miss us too," I said softly. "But I believe we'll find our way back." It wasn't a promise that everything would be fixed overnight, but it was the first step toward healing. The first time she had truly acknowledged the pain between us. And the first time I didn't feel like I needed to rush in and make everything perfect. In the days that followed, the distance between us didn't magically disappear, but it began to shrink. We started to talk again, not about everything, but about the little things. How her day went, what she had planned for the weekend, and sometimes, just sitting in silence together. Those quiet moments felt comfortable now. Not like a gap we were desperately trying to close, but like a space where we could both exist without expectation. She began to call me Mom again, slowly at first, as though testing the waters, and each time she did, my heart swelled. Not because I needed her to say it, but because it felt like we were moving forward, like we were rebuilding something that had been broken but wasn't beyond repair. We still had our moments, of course. There were still days when the silence between us would feel suffocating, when she would retreat into herself, and I would feel helpless, unsure of what to do. But each time, I remembered the silence, the peace that came from letting go, and trusting her to find her own way. Our bond was never going to be exactly the same as it once was. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the space we had both taken the time apart was exactly what we needed to rebuild, not just as mother and daughter, but as two individuals who had been through something hard and had come out on the other side strong. I knew now that love didn't always mean fixing everything. It didn't always mean having the right words to say or knowing how to make things better. Sometimes, love was just showing up, being present, and letting the other person find their way, even when you didn't have all the answers. And when she needed me again, I was there not to fix, but to listen. To love. To be a mother. Time passed, and though things were far from perfect, they were getting better. Our relationship had shifted in ways I couldn't have predicted. The tension that once filled the house began to ease, replaced by something softer: understanding, acceptance, and trust. We weren't the same as we were before the silence took over, but I had come to realize that we didn't have to. Sometimes, growth means you evolve into something different, something stronger, and I saw that in both of us. My daughter was learning to find her voice again, and I was learning how to listen, how to respect the space she needed while still being her mother. There were still moments of quiet between us, those pauses when we both wondered where the other person was emotionally, but they no longer felt like they were simply spaces to breathe, to gather our thoughts, to let life unfold at its own pace. In these moments, I knew that whatever happened, we would be okay. We had weathered the storm, and now, we were learning how to walk beside each other, step by step. One afternoon, as we sat together in the living room, she turned to me, her eyes filled with something new: vulnerability, yes, but also strength. The look she gave me was different now, not filled with anger or rejection, but with understanding, as if she had realized that I wasn't going anywhere, that no matter what happened, I was her mother, and I would always be. "Mom," she said, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't hesitate. The word no longer felt like a burden to her or a distant echo of the past. It was real, honest, and raw. It felt like a beginning, not just a return to something old, but a chance to start anew, with everything we had learned about each other and ourselves. I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. "I'm here, sweetheart, always." She nodded, and for the first time in so long, we didn't need to say anything more. The silence between us wasn't awkward or filled with fear, it was peaceful, full of understanding. The kind of silence that comes from knowing that you found your way back to each other, no words needed. And as we sat there, together, I realized how far we had come. Not just in the past few months, but in the years leading up to this moment. We had both made mistakes, we had both suffered, and we had both learned. But the most important thing was this: we had never truly given up on each other. We had both needed time, space, and the courage to face our fears, but in the end, we had arrived at a place of peace, ready to embrace the future together. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, as though she had been holding the words inside for too long. "I should have talked to you sooner." I reached out and gently placed my hand on hers. "You don't have to apologize. We're both learning, and we always will. The most important thing is that we're here now, together." And in that moment, I knew that whatever the future held for us, we would face it side by side. I would continue to be her mother, not in the way I had once imagined, but in a way that respected her journey and my own. And she would continue to be my daughter, not just the little girl I once knew, but the young woman she was becoming, with her own strengths, her own struggles, and her own story to tell. We didn't need to have all the answers, and maybe that was the greatest lesson of all. We just needed each other. And that was enough.